we don't employ practices. We manage ecological processes. We use practices to do that, but we're managing our ecological processes. What happens then is I'm sitting here watching sand and dust blow from all across our area, and we're not blowing. So I think as an ag industry in general, not just grazing lands, but especially grazing lands, historically we've presented ourselves as the reason we're important and the reason we're special is because of how hard we work and how wholesome we are, which is great. But I don't think society cares. I mean, you talk to a carpenter, a house builder, and tell them how hard you work, and she'll say, okay, great, I do too.
Welcome to the herd and thanks for listening. If you enjoy this sodcast, please like it, share it, give it a good rating, and follow, and help more people find their way into the Ruminati herd. If you have suggestions for improvements, please let me know. Howdy, everybody. Welcome to this episode of the Meet Your Herdmates sodcast. I'm pleased today to be joined by Rob Cook. Rob is someone who comes from the Panhandle region of Texas. Doesn't live there now, though, does he? That's just where you grew up. Is that correct?
I grew up and I'm back now, back in the Panhandle region.
Yes. You
Yes.
made it back home. Excellent.
Back home.
You're the vice chair of the National Grazing Lands Coalition. You're also a member of the Society for Range Management. Any other, Western Seedsman, I saw some notice here recently. Congratulations.
Yep.
You can convey those into the family. So you're currently working in a seed company. And so what kind of seeds?
Sure. Yes. Currently, I'm the director of business development for Bamert Seed Company in Muleshoe, Texas, and we produce and then clean and develop custom blends of native grasses, forbs, and legumes for the ag industry, reclamation industry, wildlife habitat. But basically, to go back to reestablish or to enhance grazing lands and wildlife habitat. But sure. So we have a farm here in Muleshoe that we produce. About 90% of the seed that we sell, we produce ourselves on our farm here in Muleshoe, and then another farm northeast of Amarillo. And
so the seed's produced on your farm by your operation. You're not contracting the production from other farmers?
Correct. There are a few strategic species that we just can't grow here in our area, because of climatic and strategic species that we do contract. But I said 90% of what we grow, what we sell, we produce. And then we have state-of-the-art seed conditioning facilities. We bring in and clean those and bag them up as individual species. And then we will develop a blend based off of soil types, ecological sites, and goals of the project. Blend those species together and ship them out. And we sell seed all over the southern half of the U.S. and a few other countries, Mexico and China. But majority of what we sell is in the southern half of the U.S. Texas, New Mexico, Oklahoma, Kansas, kind of the main ones. But we pride ourselves on having it, and we strategically hire folks that have the background to be able to select the right species and develop that blends that go into those areas where they're adapted to. So we'll produce about 125 different species and varieties, and to try to match every area that we sell into. So Texas alone, we've got 4 different varieties of Cytox grama to match the different regions within Texas. So we make sure that what's leaving, our facilities will work in the area we're selling it to.
Oh, interesting. So you mentioned reclamation industry. What exactly is that?
Sure. So a big chunk of our seed goes to the energy industry, where they're doing reclamation projects from a pipeline project, oil and gas, um, solar farms, wind farms. So kind of the unique thing about that in a lot of these areas is where a pipeline went through. If you look along the right of way of that pipeline and across these pastures, those are the only places on some of these farms and ranches where, or these areas where there's native species present that were once there, and you could see them start to move out into the pastures and kind of become a vector to reintroduce some of those species. So it's very rewarding that we might be selling to an energy project, but in the long run, we're helping grazing lands across the U.S. with our products.
That is interesting. I had never thought of that, and that's a really nice unanticipated benefit of that. Um, you So we've already mentioned grazing lands, grasslands. You're on, I think, what would be called certainly the southern part of the Great Plains in parts of that territory that you outlined, and maybe transitioning into others like the coastal plain, and then maybe more of the Southwest desert or intermountain areas. Tremendous diversity, as you were describing, that you have all these different species, or would the word ecotype be right for some of these?
You're correct. Yeah. So we do have the normal varietals, a variety that was released by ARS or the Plant Materials Center that everybody's kind of familiar with. But we do have started transitioning into doing local ecotype specific varieties of those different species. So we partner with a Texas Native Seed Program, and we're a licensed grower for them, and so they've developed these selections for different ecotypes, eco regions across the state of Texas. So their species will fit those certain ecotypes, and the genetics come from there, and we're concerned about the genetic diversity and maintaining that and those selections. And so those species are selected to be be produced and then sold back into those areas that they're adapted to specifically. So it really it becomes a smaller area as compared to our varietals. And there's historically the varietals have served the industry, reclamation ag industry, very, very well. And they still do a great job. Certain species that struggle with persistence in different areas, little blue stem might be a good example of that. The varieties work very good across the entire state, but they might not persist as long as we would like. So, these local ecotypes are variety of selection of little blue stem is selected from there and evaluated and then released and sold back.
So are you one of these people that goes out and visits old churchyards and undisturbed areas, from old settlements to find some of these species?
So yeah, so funny enough, I'm not involved in the selection maybe of these species for these releases, the TNSs, but I used to work for the Natural Resource Conservation Service, and I took care of a program called the National Resource Inventory, where I would go out and do vegetative transects and look at these, and a lot of that data would go into these ecological site descriptions. And those site descriptions have species lists and compositions based off of historical, maybe climax, plant community. And a lot of that data was taken from cemeteries or old area pristine areas that it's kind of hard to find. But so Yes, my wife kind of gets upset with me when we go on vacation because I spend more time looking at grasses a lot of times than I do other things. She's telling me you're on vacation.
It's an occupational hazard.
Yeah, that's right. I had
So,
a colleague. I had a colleague and a mentor. Uh, he said we're not tree huggers. We're grass huggers.
yes.
Yeah.
Well, so okay, let's talk about the clearly we're involved with grasses, which are the most important group of plants in the world. We all understand that. And we have these things that are called grasslands across North America. But they differ as you go from east to west. And so can you kind of describe that transition from the Atlantic coast and then as far west as you want to talk about?
Sure. Yeah, and I can briefly, maybe at a like 30,000 foot view. A lot of our grazing lands in the east are maybe converted to pasture land or introduced species and a lot of monocultures. And there's a lot of pocket prairies, I think, is what they refer to them a lot in the east, that still have those original plant communities of native species that we could still see. But over the years and as settlement moved west, some of those were converted to farmland or converted to more of a pasture land setting. So there's more monoculture. The further west you go, of course, the last time that we've since those lands have been settled, a lot of those lands maybe weren't conducive to farming or crop production in the past, and they were left in their native habitat. And of course, they become more arid a lot of times, to the west, and that maybe production agriculture wasn't as appealing or profitable or easy to accomplish. But the largest land use in the U.S. is grazing lands. That's considered pasture land and range land, compared to forest land and cropland. I would argue that our forest lands and our crop lands can be considered grazing lands, and should be grazed whenever possible. To help with the energy cycle, nutrient cycle, all those ecological processes. Grazing animals are part of those. But the pasture land and the rangeland make up a large chunk. I think there's 770 million acres of rangeland within the U.S. That's a lot of area and a lot of benefits that come off that for society. And that's, like I said, it's not even accounting or pasture land or grazed forest or grazed cropland.
So in well, so many people will point to all of that grazing land and they'll say, well, look at how much more human edible crops we could produce if we didn't have that land being in livestock production. And your answer to that would be?
A lot of our rangeland, a lot of our grazing lands are not adaptable maybe to crop production, human food production, whether it's from soil type, the geology of the area, the climate of the area. It's just not suitable for the production of human crops. So their use, the way that we're able to utilize them as society is through a grazing animal, whatever that is, or wildlife, or both. So that's how those lands are productive for society in general, and that's how we can utilize those is through the grazing animal, because they just don't farm in the side of the hill and highly erodible soils. Even if you could make it work, what's the saying? Just because you can doesn't mean you should. So it's some of those highly erodible, with a lot of topography, are better adapted to be in a grassland, a grazing land situation, and utilized by a grazing animal and wildlife, pollinators, open space,
Mhm.
that kind of.
Watershed management, all those issues, and I'll get to ecosystem services and as a topic in just a second. But one of the points that I'd like to remind people of is too many people today in general and in agriculture, or when they talk about agriculture in specifics, talk about things as if it's either or, as if we could have crop agriculture without animal agriculture, and sometimes the reverse. Um, so I try to point out how integrated livestock agriculture is globally in our food systems. Um, and that can look different when you're talking about farmers in sub-Saharan Africa versus agriculture in North America. But even in the seed production industry, certainly in the Willamette Valley where I live, we grow a little seed and we graze a lot of sheep on those seed fields
Wow.
in the late fall, winter, and early spring. So we have that integration. Do you do the same thing in your seed production or?
Yeah, we do. We have a cow calf herd. We have a registered Angus herd, and we bring in stockers. We bring in young growing animals every year to graze also. So we will graze. Normally, we'll graze after harvest with our cow calf herd. That standing forage, it's usually dormant at that point. It's really good for our mama cows. The goal in that situation is just to maintain body condition. We're not having to have extremely high quality forage to put pounds on like a growing animal, like you would in a stocker situation. And in our opinion, the grazing animal is part of those ecological processes, and that's what we're trying to manage when even on our seed production fields. You can't complete the nutrient cycle without a grazing animal. You can't complete the energy cycle without a grazing animal. You think about that entire field being a solar panel, and if we didn't have the grazing animals part of that cycle, and so you can't complete it. Historically, we probably hayed a lot of it. Uh, it's a lot more effective, efficient to use that grazing animal to remove that standing hay. That we kind of need for a seed production setting. There's also some biological benefits introducing that biology into the system that you don't get without the grazing animal. We're really concerned and really focus and manage not only what's going on above ground, but below ground, and the herd below ground, all of our biology that's happening below ground. And in my opinion, that's not possible really without a grazing animal, unless you're spending a lot of time and energy kind of trying to introduce that biology. We also use prescribed fire every year as part of our management techniques. It resets our nutrient cycle. It helps with some of our pest and weed management, especially a lot of our pest management. And these species, the majority of these species that we grow, you alluded to earlier from the high plains, the majority of these species evolved under a fire and grazing system historically. So it's part of their life cycle, how they evolve, and it's really a great benefit to us to be able to do that for a lot of different ways. We also, like I said, we'll run some stockers, run some yearling animals, for gain. We will retain our calf crop and move them over into our stocker operation, and then bring in some outside animals. And we'll do that on parts of our production that we have in small grains or summer annual. If we take out a production field for whatever reason, whether it's been there a while and it's a perennial system, so weed management, producing these, we have to produce them in monocultures to blend. So weed management is a large part of our everyday job. So a perennial system, that can get hard because if you think about what a weed is it's really just a plant out of place. So in a blue grama field, a big blue stem becomes a weed. Nobody else really normally thinks of it that way. So sometimes we have to take those production fields out, or maybe the demand's just not there for a species. So we look into our magic ball and try to decide what's going to happen in 3 or 4 years, and we take that production field out. So we will farm it. We will put it in small grains, or like I said, a summer annual, and to clean it up, to make sure we get rid of that seed bank before we go into our next crop. And I mean, we will harvest those from time to time, but we just as soon use a growing animal on those for the reasons we just discussed earlier, and just more efficient. And it's dual purpose, a lot of it, but so it doesn't make much sense to us not to incorporate livestock into our operation.
So one of the things that you might do is, for example, if you're growing winter wheat, is you might graze cattle on those fields, and then if you want a grain crop, remove those animals before we start getting the head of the plant elongating up the stem, and then so there's another example of integrating livestock production with crop production. In our part of the world, being Western Oregon, we have a lot of what we call seed straw, the residue that's baled off of the fields after the seed is combined out at harvest. And then we also have, in addition to the grazing, in addition to the seed straw, we have screening pellets. That material can be made into a feed resource and fed to animals. So in those three ways, even just looking at seed production alone, we can see the integration of livestock. And so I think it's really important for people to understand that there are these interactions between livestock agriculture and crop agriculture, and we can't just rip them apart and say we've got one or the other, in addition to what we talked about earlier, where most of this rangeland and pasture land you mentioned was non-arable land. It wasn't suitable for cultivation. And we do have a history in this country of cultivating lands that shouldn't be, and bad things happen. That's for another episode, perhaps, but people are familiar with the Dust Bowl, which is right where you are. Is that not correct?
That is correct. And there's still times where in this part of the world, it's no secret that things kind of do remind you of the Dust Bowl, and we still have a ways to go. And I think that's part of Nat GLC's mission is the education and bringing together these member organizations to try to get that message out. But it is very refreshing to be sitting here. I live on the farm right now and be sitting here, and because of we don't employ practices, we manage ecological processes. We use practices to do that, but we're managing our ecological processes. And what happens then is I'm sitting here watching sand and dust blow from all across our area, and we're not blowing, and we're not constantly having to break out the sand fighters, which is a plow that's used in the area to stop the sand from blowing, because we're managing our ecological processes. And when those processes are functioning correctly, our soil erosion is held to a minimum, just from our normal everyday management.
I was introduced to the term snert in North Dakota.
Snert.
Snert, snow and dirt.
Yeah,
What you see in the ditches next to the highways. So this is it's not merely in what many people, myself included until a couple of years ago, think of as the Dust Bowl, because North Dakota had its own during the dirty 30s. I mean, it wasn't only in that southeastern Colorado, southwestern Kansas, and adjoining state region. Um, so you mentioned the National Grazing Lands Coalition, NatGLC. Um, so first of all, it's a national organization, but it's a coalition of state. I think it's at that level, or are there more local than the state organizations?
Yeah, so sure that the national GLC kind of came about. I think it was in 1991. A group of six different organizations and state agencies, national agencies came together and decided we need to form a coalition to ensure that technical assistance was still provided on our nation's grazing lands. We felt that maybe at the time, and it's still now, a lot of times, a lot of the money for research, a lot of the research, a lot of program dollars and technical assistance dollars goes to other agriculture pursuits, cropland and that kind of thing. So just to make sure to ensure that our grazing lands have that technical assistance. So in the beginning, it was the American Farm Bureau. And I'm going to read this to make sure I don't leave anybody out. But we had the American Farm Bureau, the American Forage and Grassland Council, the National Association of Conservation Districts, National Cattlemen's Beef Association, and then the Society for Range Management. Those were the founding organizations. And since then, the dairy industry, the National Farmers Union, the Noble Research Institute, the Soil and Water Conservation Society, and the Public Land Council have been brought on, and they're kind of part of the steering committee. So the board of NatGLC is made up of members that represent each one of those organizations. So I represent the Society for Range Management, involved Society for Range Management. So that's how that steering committee and that board's put together. The unique thing about that is all of our board members are producers, produce food and fiber on our nation's grazing land, and that's what's one of the real important aspects of our coalition to me is producer led, and so the NatGLC group represents all those organizations. Like I said, is a national coalition. There are state coalitions. The 24 different states have coalitions, and some former from very, very active right now to continuing to become more active, but 24 different statewide coalitions. And the great thing about that is those state coalitions are producer led also. And so their organizations are whatever they need to be. The organization of either structure of their organizations or whatever they need to be to match what their state needs. So Texas has different regions. There's regional coalitions within Texas that have their own board. Such a diverse big state, it really works for them. And it's really needed to have those different coalitions. So a regional coalition will have board members, producers within that region to help with that. Other states maybe not as much diversity or smaller geographical areas, and it's sometimes it's hard to get the leadership, and if you try to divide it all up, it wouldn't work as well. So they might have one, but it's whatever works for that state, and it's state led and producer led. So the national organization just helps support in any way possible those state coalitions, from working with grant money, try to develop grant monies to help with different projects within those states, to just be an advocate nationally to help with the goals of all of us to help support what those state led coalitions are doing.
So it is unique, I think, or certainly important that the organizations be directed and run by producer members. I think that does contribute something important to it. But I'm wondering if there's an opportunity for people who aren't producers to become involved for education or even to help those local coalitions um, engaged in the work in those areas.
Yeah, I think there's always we're all about partnerships, from a national level to the state level. So I think there's always opportunities for different group maybe people that aren't involved in agriculture directly to partner with a state coalition. One of the big things personally for me is I'm excited that seems like there's a trend for folks to want to understand where their food comes from. I think sometimes there's more of a wants to understand than there actually is an understanding of what it actually takes to produce that food and fiber. But I think we're getting there. But that's a huge thing to me, and I think the education of our school children on where their water comes from, where their food comes from, is a great place that people that aren't directly involved in the ag industry to partner with a local coalition to try to bring that education and that advocacy and the communication of proper stewardship to those school children, so they understand where their food comes from and why grazing lands are important. And they'll be voters one day, and I think we're seeing that level with more of our shift to urban populations. Than the further they are removed from rural environments where their food comes from, the less of an understanding there is of where that food comes from, and the importance of some of our programs and policies on a national and state level, even a local level, to make sure that it's not a detriment to the production of the food that they rely on. So I think there's a great deal of partnership there. There's always I think a fundraising aspect that every group like national GLC, a state-led coalition, there's always a fundraising aspect of that. But I think just being an advocate is a big part of anything. Is the advocate for healthy grazing lands, and that's a great way to partner directly or indirectly with these groups.
And the people that are involved in Nat GLC certainly have the technical background to provide information to help people learn so that they can become informed and then become advocates. Um, and I don't want to put a jinx on it, but I understand that in about a year, you're anticipating a pretty major conference.
You bet. Yeah. So every 3 years, the Nat GLC has their annual conference. So this will be in December 6th through 9th, 2021, in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. We'll have eight in GLC, so our eighth conference. One of the real unique things about this conference is the majority of the presentations and the learning we do during those 4 days are from producers. There's of course we have scientists and scientific presentations, but the majority of what's being discussed is by producers and hopefully to producers, and then also to scientists and other industry folks. So that's a great way to help support is even if you're not directly involved, they'll have grazing animals or live on grazing lands to be a part of that. And it's a great networking experience, being able to learn from those producers from all across the nation. I'll pick up a lot that hopefully I can bring back to our grazing, our grazing program, based off of those presentations, just speaking with those folks, in the hallways and learning from what they're doing. And I know other states have state state programs, also state conferences going on. I've attended Texas several times, and they've all been great programs.
Hmm. So it's really clear, or it should be clear, that our beef supply is dependent on healthy grasslands. And as you've said, it's not only but the grasslands themselves are dependent on properly managed beef grazing. So that's a clear advantage and essential role for grasslands. But there are some others, and I understand that those are kind of lumped under ecosystem services as a category, so that when, for example, people are discussing the footprint of, or the hoofprint of the beef industry, that these are things that are contributed by the managers, but they don't get compensated for them, but they are a benefit to society. So I think it's really important for people to have an understanding of some of those and how important they are.
Sure. Yeah, I think you're 100% right. Right. Historically, ag producers have been paid for one ecosystem service, that being food and fiber. When in reality, they provide many different services for society that we all need. Properly managed grazing lands provide high quality, clean drinking water. If you kind of step back and think about it, whether you get water from a lake, a reservoir, or an underground aquifer, a well, that raindrop has fallen on grazing land somewhere. Grazing lands produce the majority, or I don't know what percentage it is, but produce our drinking water. And healthy managed grazing lands have a proper hydrological cycle. And so that's a service that ag producers provide for society that they normally don't get credit for, is clean water. Biodiversity is another one of those. And we talk a lot about, we hadn't really talked on pollinators much, but pollinators is a huge topic. And we're really, I think, historically, we probably understood it, and maybe that was a knowledge that kind of went by the wayside. I don't think we forgot it. We might have just ignored it a little bit, but how important pollinators are to our entire food production systems, from the get-go. And so I think the biodiversity with those pollinator forbs and legumes, what some people consider weeds or wildflowers, they don't just look pretty. They provide that habitat for pollinators, and the habitat for wildlife. And the biodiversity above ground breeds biodiversity below ground. All of those different organisms that live below ground are part of each one of those cycles of the ecological processes that we talk about having to manage. So we have to have the right types and combinations of microbes below ground to make those roots functions, to make our soil have the right pore space and the right structure, to have the right correct water infiltration, the water holding capacity, the nutrient cycling, how our phosphorus and our nitrogen and our potassium, you think about, those are the ones we normally apply to ag systems. So you kind of step back and think about a native rangeland situation where we can produce, let's just throw it out, 8,000 pounds of forage production per acre without adding a drop of nitrogen to that. How does that happen? You think of ag production systems a lot of times, that those amendments, those inputs, nitrogen being one of those, it has to be there to produce high levels of forage production. Well, a native range system does it. A healthy native range system does it without those inputs. And it's because that nutrient cycle and all the microbes above ground are doing their job and making those available to the plant. So that biodiversity is very important below ground as well as above ground. A wildlife habitat. I think no matter where you're at, I think the majority of people kind of enjoy wildlife and understand how important they are to all of our systems. So it's a service that properly managed grazing lands provides as wildlife habitat. Um, and if you look at the hunting industry, the hunting conservation is a large driver for for the success of a lot of our species. But a lot of that habitat lies on grazing lands. So we could credit a lot of our wildlife habitat to the proper management of our grazing lands, along with our sportsmen. Adding those dollars for that, and just open space. If you live in, see, grew up in the Texas Panhandle, small town called Vega, and I moved to San Angelo to go to Angelo State University, and thought I'd move to the city. And right after school, I was stationed at San Antonio, and I found out kind of what the city was. And I can understand needing open space, and it is a service that we all need. Whether you live in the city or you live in the Panhandle, open spaces from time to time is good for the soul and good for the blood pressure, basically. Yeah. So that's a service that we provide. So I think as an ag industry in general, not just grazing lands, but especially grazing lands, historically we've presented ourselves as the reason we're important and the reason we're special is because of how hard we work and how wholesome we are, which is great. But I don't think society cares. I mean, you talk to a carpenter, a house builder, and tell them how hard you work, and she'll say, okay, great, I do too. So we have to get away from that historic notion of hard work and wholesome, and that's why we're important, that's why we're unique, and start telling our story about what we actually provide for society, which is these ecosystem services, which is basically a healthy ecosystem, a healthy planet. And it's not one or the other. It's not food and fiber production or a healthy ecosystem. It's both. And historically, there's been a lot of good producers that have done that, have been able to do it both. And so, Nat GLC, we want to make sure that we continue to promote that and advocate for the needs of these grazing land managers so they can manage those ecosystem services.
Yeah, so there's so many threads to pick up, but one thing I'd add is the proper management of grasslands aids in fire suppression. Yeah. And be that forest, mixed forest grassland systems or other open grasslands where you just have too much fuel accumulated. And proper management is important for limiting invasive weed pressure and lots of issues. Your point is very well said, I think, about we've in agriculture have wanted credit for things, which, okay, it's justified, but maybe we need to rethink it from another perspective when the majority of people today are not coming from an agricultural background. So to make it clear the other benefits from appropriate agricultural practices. But one of the things that I wonder about is, and I've seen it in the mission statement that's posted on the Nat GLC website about resisting the conversion of grazing land into other uses. So what are the pressures on grazing land for other uses?
Sure. So the margin on a grazing operations are normally pretty thin, pretty small. So
by margin, you mean
margins as far as profit from cost, your cost to your profit. So there's a real temptation maybe to convert to another land use or to sell to fragmentation. I think fragmentation is a is a big threat. Um, and depending on the year, depending on the species, uh, maybe conversion to farming or something like that can seem more profitable. So conversion of land is one of the big ones. So a way to combat that is to make it economically viable for a grazing land manager owner uh, to stay on that property or to keep it in that land use from getting payment from something besides food and fiber. Those other ecological services that are provided to society that are very important. And, I think there are some examples of that's happened in the past from a local to a state to national programs where these grazing land producers are getting paid for those other ecological ecosystem services. Uh, there's been I think some pilots from companies or different municipalities uh, to pay the landowners, and a lot of them are grazing landowners in watersheds to make sure that they're managing those ecological processes to provide clean water. It's a lot more cost effective um, to take that water that's already clean than it is to spend the money to clean it. If it's coming off of those grazing lands and it's not in a pristine condition. And I think there's different ecosystem service market consortium as a group that's been put together that I think are investigating and maybe has some pilots going on how a free market approach to the selling of those ecosystem ecosystem services, in a free market aids these grazing land producers to be profitable for those services they're providing all of us.
And of course, you know my soapbox, and I would say that the product of ruminant animal agriculture based on healthy grasslands ends up being a fundamental part of a healthy human diet, and possibly even a diet that could yield an improvement in public health if we could get that policy all sorted out. But I've already done enough episodes on that topic with other people, so we don't need to go there any more than I have. Sorry. But I think that's also really important because I think that these policies do tend to get interwoven, and if people put greater value on that, then maybe they'd also put greater value on programs aimed at helping the producers who are producing those, and vice versa. If you don't put value on it, then why bother? Um, so I think that if we could have a more holistic view of the entire system from producer through consumer, I think we'd see a lot of these conversations shift. Um, you mentioned that you represent the Society for Range Management. And if you could you just talk about that organization a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. The Society for Range Management is a professional society organization I've been involved in since college, and their goal is it's a professional organization, but it's kind of to bring together the science behind rangeland management. So it consists of producers, academics, and researchers, and it's kind of the goal is to help advance further the science of rangeland management and to advocate for healthy rangelands. But it's kind of the same as Nat GLC, and as far as the connections that I've been able to make and what I've been able to learn by being a part of that group and learning from my peers has been outstanding. It's really help advance not only my career but my understanding of the art and science of rangeland management.
And there's now that's a national organization, but I think that there's a fair representation from other countries at the at the conferences. There's an International Rangeland Society that may not be its right name. And frequently there are joint meetings between, well, frequently, when the International Grasslands Congress has meetings, they will often be in conjunction with the International Rangeland. Um, but I also think in the literature, in the journal, you can find articles from research around the world.
That's correct. Yeah. So it does. As the professional society for rangeland management, it does. What's charges is the Journal of Rangeland Ecology. Um, that you kind of manage that, but you're correct. From all across the world, there's submit articles for that journal, and they do have certification program for rangeland managers. Certified professional range management, and they have a certified consulting, certification also. And not only internationally, but also there's state sections all across the nation. I'm currently serve on the board of the Texas section and have been involved with the Oklahoma section study for range management. They also have their own conventions and kind of so it kind of the same organizational structure to an extent as Nat GLC to get down to a more local level to get more granular, but a great organization to be a part of, and I owe a lot of my development through my career to being a part of that and being involved in that organization.
And again, a source of information for people who are interested and want to learn more. I know that many of these organizations put out resources in addition to a journal to just help people learn, because again, that's part of their mission. Um, so I've asked you a bunch of questions, and it's only fair to give you the opportunity to ask me if you have any.
Sure. So I mentioned earlier that I'm excited that people seem to be interested in where their food comes from. So I think there's a disconnect from that desire to know where their food comes from and to actually start to understand what it involves. So part of as Nat GLC, part of our goals is to advocate for grazing lands. So how do you feel that we could start bridging that gap and bringing people, making them more connected to their food sources? I think that does several things. Among those, helps us to maybe have a healthier diet that's more tied to our ecosystem processes, if that's the correct way to state that. But how do groups like ours, uh, uh, groups like Bamert Seed, or anybody that's interested in that, how do we start bridging that gap more effectively?
Great question. I think one is just make ourselves more widely known and available to have conversations. It's comfortable to stay within our little circle, and maybe we need to get uncomfortable a little bit by putting maybe the appropriate people. Not everybody may feel like this is right, but to get out there a little bit. Number two, I think one of my goals is, again, two-way communication. So I think there's a lot for us to learn from each other. And if people only hear it coming one way, that only lasts so long. I think in Missouri, they say, I'd rather watch a sermon than listen to one. So let's see how you actually live it out. When it comes to the diet, I've entertained thoughts of or health in general. I'm really trying to become diet agnostic. I'm more concerned. How was it that you put it, that it's ecological processes? Is that how you put it?
We manage ecological processes.
So I want to get us more aware of the metabolic processes. and how you choose individually, because I understand we all have different priorities and controlling limitations in our lives. And limitations isn't the right word, but um, realities. So, but if we understand what those processes are, then we can begin to understand what are meaningful metrics of health. And then we could understand, okay, these are trending in a undesirable direction. How might we shift those? And then are we going to do that or not? And I think if groups of people could start educating themselves and doing that, then that becomes powerful evidence. And in some cases, opens the door to lots more conversations beyond that. I mean, if people start to realize, oh, look what these people are doing here, wonder what else they're doing. And that might be one way. And like I say, just to use the technology that we now have available to us to engage in social media or small clips of video that would, show things and explain things in a way that the general public would maybe grasp and understand. So those would be maybe three things that I'd offer in response.
Throughout my career, it's always been interesting to me. You, I think we have to be careful as an industry to say that my healthy plants, my healthy animals, the healthy food I produce is better because of the way I did it. It's better than yours because I did it in a different way. We can't throw stones at each other, and I think historically we've definitely done that in some instances, and I think that goes a lot to the misinformation uh, to the consumer and to society. We do that to ourselves a lot. So I think that's one pitfall that we have to avoid is if we're all doing our best in managing ecological processes, that my healthy food is not better than your healthy food because we produce it in a little bit different way.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think that I really um, am suspicious of those kinds of marketing claims. And I repeatedly ask some people who've been involved in the human health side for decades, right? You saw benefits in people's health and you were doing it with what was available in the supermarket. And at the end of the day, we I understand marketing, right? I get it. Um, but this is about making the food that I believe we all require for health and well-being available and accessible to all the people that we possibly can. And these other claims tend to get in the way of that, and they tend to get in the way of adoption. Well, I can't afford to spend, 3x for this as opposed to that. And also I try to let people know that animal agriculture as an industry is being opposed by people who really don't care how you do it. It's that you do it. And that's their fundamental issue, is that there should be no animal agriculture. There should be no consumption of animal source food. And we can't afford the division that you mentioned, the us and them. And there I did it. I just did it with an us and them. I just want to not do that as much as possible.
Right. Yeah, I agree full heartedly, and I think there's a lot of ways to do things correctly, and a lot of it comes down to how you fundamentally feel that as a producer the correct way for you to do things, and and I think I said it before, but if we're managing our ecological processes correctly, there's room for all of it. So.
Well, and if we're doing that right, then we're lowering costs of production, which makes those operations more sustainable. And everyone is going to do that to the best of their ability, given the limitations of the reality of their operation. Um, I started 10 years ago writing and talking about something that I call grass-based health. I'm a forage agronomist. Of course, I was impressed with the grass-fed whatever. And then I went and read the studies. And so I'm no longer convinced of those claims. I keep the name in part because ruminant animal agriculture is grass-based, regardless of how those animals end up being finished, whether they go the rest of their lives on grass or for a relatively short time into some other kind of feeding system. I also keep it to remind me of lessons about, selection bias and personal bias. It's easy for human beings to fall for that. Um, and no, I absolutely agree with what you said, that we in livestock agriculture, in agriculture, can't afford divisions within us. It's too important for us to, well, improve what needs to be improved and help each other do that. And then at the same time, advocate for, so that one, we have the support. And I think it's important to do these things politically, directly. I think it's maybe even more important to do those through the general public and increase their awareness, because there's a lot more there than there is of us to go directly. So
Agreed.
wonderful. Well, I hope to see you in Myrtle Beach. And thank you for your time and what you've contributed in this conversation. Are you on social media? Is Bamert Seed on social media?
Yes, Bamert Seed is on Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn, and Nat GLC is also on Facebook and Instagram. So Nat GLC might be the National Grazing Lands Coalition or National GLC if you're searching for those. But I think both groups do a great job on social media and getting the word out and advocacy out. And yeah, please take a look at that, and everyone. And I really thank you for the opportunity too. I think it's a great conversation, and thank you for what you're doing with your platform, and really appreciate you taking the time and allowing us to be a part of it.
My pleasure. You're more than welcome.